You were not simply born. Your body survived a brutal biological selection process, and most never made it this far. Before any of us were loved, named, or even noticed, our bodies behaved like invaders. That idea disturbed me the first time I heard it. Not because it was wrong, but because it was true. We like to imagine pregnancy as something peaceful. A gentle beginning. A quiet miracle unfolding in warmth and protection. And emotionally, that picture makes sense. But biologically, the story starts in a place that feels much harsher. Much colder. Much more unforgiving than most of us ever realize. The beginning of every human life is not soft. It is violent. It is selective. And it is unbelievably precise. The more I learned about biology, the more fascinated I became with this uncomfortable truth. Life does not begin with certainty. It begins with a test, a brutal one, where failure is the norm and survival is the rare exception. That realization changed the way I look at existence itself. Because suddenly, being alive no longer felt ordinary. It felt earned. Every human life starts with an army. Tens of millions of sperm cells surge forward at once, each carrying half the instructions needed to build a new person. They are microscopic, fragile, and running on limited fuel. Most of them will die within hours. But death from exhaustion is not what makes this journey remarkable. What makes it remarkable is the environment they enter. The female reproductive tract is not an open doorway waiting to welcome life. It is a fortress, one designed over millions of years to protect the body from harm. The conditions inside are hostile by design. The environment is highly acidic, strong enough to destroy weaker cells almost immediately. Immune defenses patrol constantly, identifying anything that does not belong. Thick biological barriers slow movement, trap stragglers, and eliminate those that cannot keep up. Nothing here is accidental. This is biology asking a single, relentless question. Are you capable of surviving? Within minutes, millions are gone. Within an hour, even more disappear. The numbers collapse faster than most people can imagine. What began as an overwhelming force quickly becomes a dwindling handful of survivors pushing forward into darkness, driven by nothing but momentum and chance. And when I first understood this, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If life begins this way, in chaos, danger, and relentless selection, then the fact that any of us are here at all is already something extraordinary. And yet, surviving that first wave of danger was only the beginning of the real test. What happens next is the part that truly stunned me when I first studied it, because this journey does not simply get harder, it becomes smarter. The body is not just eliminating the weak. It is constantly measuring, filtering, and refining, almost like an engineer stress testing a bridge before allowing anyone to cross. By this stage, only a few hundred sperm remain, drifting through a landscape that feels less like a pathway and more like a maze designed to confuse and exhaust them. The environment thickens. The passage is narrow. Movement slows. It is no longer a race of speed, but a test of endurance and direction. I remember thinking about how unfair it seemed at first. These cells have already survived acid, immune defenses, and exhaustion, and still the system refuses to make things easy. But then another realization followed. Pregnancy is one of the most demanding biological investments a human body can make. Months of energy, risk, and vulnerability. From that perspective, it makes perfect sense that the body would demand proof before committing to such a costly process. So the filtering continues. Sticky networks of proteins trap weaker cells and hold them in place until they simply stop moving. Tiny currents push others off course. Some choose the wrong direction entirely, disappearing into dead ends that lead nowhere. Meanwhile, immune cells quietly remove those that fall behind, maintaining order in a system that cannot afford mistakes. And then something subtle, but fascinating, begins to happen. If ovulation has occurred, the body shifts its behavior just slightly. Chemical signals begin to guide movement, like faint lights appearing in the distance. The environment becomes a little less hostile, not out of kindness, but out of timing. Biology is aligning two separate systems with remarkable precision, ensuring that the opportunity for life exists only within a very narrow window. Still, the numbers continue to fall. Dozens become tens. Tens become just a few. Until eventually, after hours of relentless filtering, only a tiny group remains, suspended in a vast space, facing the final stretch of the journey. And ahead of them waits something enormous, silent, and decisive. The egg. And that is when the journey shifts from survival to decision. When the remaining sperm finally reach the egg, the atmosphere changes in a way that feels almost quiet, like the moment before something irreversible happens. After hours of chaos, filtering, and relentless loss, everything suddenly slows down. The survivors gather around a structure so large that, compared to them, it might as well be a planet. The egg is enormous by cellular standards, packed with nutrients, energy reserves, and thousands upon thousands of mitochondria ready to power the first steps of life. But what struck me most when I first learned about it was not its size or strength. It was its authority. We often grow up hearing that the fastest or strongest sperm wins. That story sounds simple, almost heroic. But biology rarely works like a race with a finish line. The truth is more deliberate, more controlled, and in many ways more humbling. The egg decides. As the sperm surround it, they begin releasing enzymes, trying to break through the egg's protective outer layer. They push, attach, detach, and try again. From the outside, it looks like persistence, like determination. But entry is not guaranteed by effort alone. The egg monitors chemical signals, evaluates compatibility, and waits for the right moment. Only when conditions are acceptable does it open a tiny doorway and allow a single sperm to enter. And the instant that happens, everything changes. The egg seals itself shut. The barrier hardens. Every other sperm is locked out forever. What was once a chaotic competition ends in absolute silence, as if the door to a new world has just closed behind one traveler. Two genetic blueprints merge into one. A completely new genome forms, something that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly the same way. At that moment, the egg is no longer just part of the mother's body. It becomes something new, something independent, carrying its own instructions and its own future. When I first understood this step, I remember feeling a strange mix of awe and humility. Life does not begin because something forces its way in. It begins because it is accepted. But acceptance is not the same as safety. Because the newly formed embryo now faces the most uncertain stage of all, finding a place to belong. And finding a place to belong turns out to be far more difficult than simply being created. In the days that follow fertilization, the embryo begins dividing at an astonishing speed. One cell becomes 2, then 4, then 8, then dozens, a quiet explosion of life unfolding in total darkness. As it grows, it drifts slowly toward the uterus, the only environment capable of supporting long-term survival. But this journey is not just about movement. It is about negotiation. This was the moment in the process that changed my perspective the most. I had always assumed that once an embryo existed, pregnancy would naturally continue. But biology does not operate on assumptions. It operates on evaluation. When the embryo reaches the uterine wall, it faces a critical decision point, not its own, but the body's. The uterus is not an empty space waiting to be occupied. It is a highly regulated system designed to protect the mother first. Allowing another organism to attach means committing enormous resources, altering metabolism, and accepting months of physical risk. From the body's point of view, this is not a small favor. It is a major investment. So the embryo must introduce itself. It releases a cascade of chemical signals, announcing its presence and requesting permission to stay. In response, the cells of the uterus send signals back, carefully analyzing the embryo's condition. They monitor how quickly it is growing, how efficiently it is using energy, and whether its genetic instructions appear stable. If something seems wrong, if development is irregular or signals are inconsistent, the conversation ends. The uterine lining withdraws support, and the embryo is lost before anyone ever realizes it was there. But if the signals are strong and balanced, something remarkable begins to happen. Specialized cells called trophoblasts multiply rapidly and move outward, anchoring the embryo to the uterine wall. Some of these cells push gently into the surrounding tissue, opening pathways to nearby blood vessels. Others build protective layers that stabilize the connection. At the same time, the mother's immune system, which normally destroys foreign cells without hesitation, does something extraordinary. It holds back. Instead of attacking, certain immune cells gather around the embryo and help maintain a stable environment. They create a protective zone, ensuring that growth can continue without triggering harmful inflammation. The relationship is delicate, conditional, and constantly monitored. Because even now, survival is not guaranteed. This stage is less like a battle and more like a fragile agreement, one that must be renewed every moment if life is going to continue. And if that fragile agreement holds, something extraordinary begins to unfold. Around 8 weeks after fertilization, the quiet cluster of cells that once struggled simply to stay alive crosses an invisible threshold. It is no longer called an embryo. It becomes a fetus. The change sounds technical, almost bureaucratic, but biologically it marks a profound transformation. What was once a tiny, uncertain presence is now a developing system with structure, direction, and momentum. I remember the first time I saw an early ultrasound image while studying this process. It didn't look like a person yet. Not even close. But there was movement, a rhythm, a pulse, a sense that something was organizing itself with incredible determination. That moment stayed with me, because it made the whole story feel real in a way textbooks never could. From here, growth accelerates at a scale that almost defies imagination. Over the following months, the fetus will increase its weight more than 1 billion times. Organs begin forming in careful sequence. The heart strengthens. The nervous system expands into a dense network of connections. Limbs lengthen. Features sharpen. Every hour, countless cells divide, specialize, and coordinate their work with astonishing precision. It is like watching a massive construction project unfold without noise, without pause, and without a single supervisor giving orders. At the center of this process stands the placenta, the temporary organ built earlier by those tireless trophoblast cells. It acts as both bridge and shield, delivering oxygen and nutrients, while filtering out many harmful substances. It regulates hormones, balances energy, and keeps 2 separate bodies functioning as a single system. Yet even in this stage of cooperation, the balance remains delicate. Because pregnancy is not just growth. It is negotiation. The fetus draws energy from the mother, sometimes pushing her metabolism to its limits. The mother's body adapts in response, adjusting blood flow, hormone levels, and immune activity to keep both lives stable. Neither side can dominate completely. Survival depends on cooperation, moment by moment, day after day. And this is the realization that continues to humble me every time I think about it. If you are alive today, this entire process happened to you. Not in theory. Not in a diagram. In reality. You survived a sequence of biological challenges, so complex and demanding that most attempts never make it this far. You were supported, protected, and sustained through months of careful balance between 2 living systems working together to stay alive. Life did not begin gently. It began with risk, persistence, and an extraordinary partnership that carried you into the world. When I step back and look at this entire journey, one lesson becomes impossible to ignore. Life is not accidental, and it is not cheap. Every one of us began with uncertainty, survived intense selection, and depended on cooperation to exist. That realization should change how we live today. It reminds us to treat our bodies with respect, to value the people who support us, and to stop taking ordinary days for granted. Survival got us here, but intention is what gives life meaning. The way we choose to live now is the continuation of that first victory. So here is a simple question for you. What is one thing in your life right now that you realize is more valuable than you used to think? I would genuinely love to hear your perspective. Please share your answer down in the comments, so everyone can learn from each other's experiences. And if this story helped you see life from a new angle, consider subscribing to the channel to support us. It truly gives us the motivation to keep creating meaningful content for you next time.